As data becomes increasingly valuable, securing it has never been more important. Hello and a very warm welcome to Skyflow Presents ETSTUDIOs, ensuring data protection in association with ETCIO. I'm your host Himanshi Tiwari. Now in this session, we dive into the world of data privacy and security, critical components in our data-driven era. We're joined in by Anshu Sharma, who is the co-founder and CEO of Skyflow, the data privacy vault company. Anshu, welcome to the show. We want to start by understanding the journey of Skyflow. You know, it's really intriguing to know about data security, about data privacy vaults that you are dealing in. But let's start by the journey. Like you started 5 years back, right? How all that happened?
I spent most of my career at companies like Oracle and Salesforce, where we are either handling all data in the world or all customer data. And as people started building more and more applications that rely on consumer data, there was some shift that taking place. So I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, when you went and bought a coffee, you bought a coffee. You didn't give them a phone number. They didn't ask for your Aadhaar ID. There was no credit card exchange. You go to a coffee shop, you pay them in rupees or dollars, and you're done. Without us realizing it over the last 15 years, even a cup of coffee now involves exchange of PII, right? Yeah. They know your location, where you're drinking the coffee. They actually have your credit card number. If you want to order it ahead and pick it up, then they know your phone number. They have location information in you. Sometimes they know more about my location than my family does. Mm-hmm. So essentially, that's not just the coffee company, whether it's the taxi you're taking. Again, taxis used to be anonymous, right? You take a taxi that you'll never meet the taxi driver again. But now with Uber, Ola, Blue Smart, they know what's going on in your life, and they hold PII. Yeah. So what I saw was this thing that we all talk about all the time called digital transformation. What is digital transformation? Digital transformation simply means activities that we used to do anonymously, without knowing the company and the company knowing about us. We are now digitally engaged, which means that I have given you some information that you are holding on to that allows you to give me digital services. So whether it's rebooking my flight because I'm running late, or whether it's dropping me off at my parents' place, you have all this information. So what we saw was, as people were building all of these experiences and going through what we call digital transformation, every company went from having almost no PII to having way too much PII. And when that happened, unlike banks and telcos, so banks have always had your personal information, but it wasn't really the case for your taxi company, coffee company, TV company, airline company to have all that information. So suddenly, everybody becomes like a bank, but none of these companies were built like a bank, right? In a bank, you have systems in place to make sure that your money is safe and your data is safe. But everybody else, they're just selling coffee. They're just giving you a car ride. So I saw that happen again and again. It became very clear to me that companies don't have the capabilities to actually engage with us. In fact, as you know, banks also have a lot of breaches, and they are the furthest ahead. So it became very clear that someone should go out and solve the problem of managing the life cycle of our personal information, because that era is never coming back. We are not going to an era where I have to wait 3 hours for a taxi to show up because it doesn't know my location, doesn't know my phone number, doesn't have my credit card number. So this new era requires every company to handle some personal information, but they can't do it properly unless there is a platform that allows them to actually securely handle that. So that's what led to creation of Skyflow.
All right, when you talk about data privacy, you talk with so much love, and it's really fascinating to hear about all those concepts from you. But maybe it's time for some hard questions, right? Yeah. So we live in a competitive market, right? And you at Skyflow are dealing in this data privacy segment. So how are you kind of keeping that sort of competitive edge, to stay ahead of the curve?
So I've worked for a lot of companies in my career, and I think sometimes we get too attached to categories. So, when Oracle was launched, databases wasn't even a category. Yeah. Data was category. In fact, companies like IBM that wrote the original papers for database didn't even build one for many years. Yeah. Salesforce, again, we had CRMs for 10 plus years before that. So we don't try to figure out the category, the nomenclature. we ask a very simple question. When you give your phone number or Aadhaar ID to an airline or a hotel, how safe do you feel? And the same question we ask the CTOs and CIOs and CISOs of those companies. How comfortable are they that the news item tomorrow coming online is not going to say they had a breach where somebody's phone number was leaked or Aadhaar ID was leaked? And the reality is that problem is completely unsolved. You just have to read the newspaper every day, whether it's in the US, Europe, or India. Most of the data breaches are happening almost on a daily, weekly basis. So if this problem was solved by the competitors who've been around for decades, then we wouldn't have need for a Skyflow. So what actually happened was a lot of these technologies were built for the world of data centers, right? So think about it this way. If you lived in a single family home, what in India we call koti, right? So if your home is alone, security would mean building a big fence so that nobody gets in. Once you build a big fence and nobody gets in, you're 100% secure, right? But that's not the world we live in now. There is no data centers where that airline data is sitting. Your data is actually sitting in the cloud, in some vector database. So where do you put the fence? So think of the entire cybersecurity industry, which makes about $200 billion a year. They were in the business of selling you fences and cameras around these data center or homes that no longer exist. So what we need to do now is, in this new era of Google Cloud, Amazon, Snowflake, we can't build the same fences. So people who are competing with us are trying to sell you fences when you move to an apartment complex or a hotel or a flat. Well, the technology doesn't work. What you need now is a completely different set of technologies. So that's why we invented something called polymorphic engine with zero trust architecture. We have completely ignored the fences market and asked the question, if I wanted to securely get you from the entry of your home to your apartment, what would I do? Well, most likely you're receiving packages. Those packages have to be securely stored somewhere. Maybe there's an Uber driver that comes to pick you up. Maybe he has to be identified. Completely new set of problems than if you were living with a driver in your own home. Similarly, in the cybersecurity world, we're building what we call a PII vault. It's designed assuming that you will have Snowflake, you will have BigQuery, you will have AWS. So we've re-architected the solution in a world that we now live in, where everybody has PII and it's stored in multiple different clouds in different locations. So the competition that we have is fences competition against our vault architecture.
All right, before going ahead, I would really want to understand, for example, I am storing my data on a cloud. Now, where all that data goes, if you would help us explain that in layman terms for our audience at ET.
Perfect question. And we love layman questions because, as I said, we want to think about these problems from first principles, right? Acronyms don't protect our data. If they did, we would already be secure. So it's good to understand as consumers and as CTOs what happens. So when you enter your data in a mobile application, typically these days, it has to somehow safely first get to the internet, which typically is some kind of web application. Then it gets stored in a database that's meant for storing your information to engage with you. Then that information goes into some kind of a search engine, like Elasticsearch, because at some point you'll go in there and search for your information. Then it goes to an analytics system like Snowflake or Teradata, because at some point you want to run a report and say, how much did I spend last year on diamonds versus gold? That data then it gets mixed up with every other user's data, so we can create profiles and segments, which is what happens in Segment and CDPs and Salesforces of the world. Then that data has to be used to actually engage with you. So a Twilio might send you a text message, an SMS Gupshup might send you a call. So in some ways, your personal information, PII, is going through a journey. It's used initially for you to register. In that sense, it's being an identifier. Sometimes it's being used to analyze you, which means it's being used to figure out where you live. Sometimes it's used to actually correlate you with other people. Who are the other people who buy similar things? In that case, it's being used for analytics. So all of these use cases require some part of your information, but not all parts. And that's the key. The key is when we give information to somebody, we expect them to use it for the purposes that we allowed them to do and do it thoughtfully. But today what ends up happening is, because I have to send you a text, so I store your phone number in my text messaging system. Because I have to accept your credit card, I store your credit card number. Because I have to analyze the data and let you search, I put it in every system. So all of these places, you end up duplicate copies of personal information, which is sometimes too easily accessible to too many people. And that's why hackers are able to get in, because if I make, it's like, imagine I made a copy of an Aadhaar ID and gave it to 50 people. I just have to breach one person's security to get access to it. On the other hand, if I took your Aadhaar ID and safely put it in a vault and I gave you a token and said, look, you can give a token to 50 people, then if one of those people gets breached, they don't have your Aadhaar ID, they just have some encrypted token. So that's some of the insights that we've been using to figure out where the data is, how it's used, and how do we limit it.
All right, so this is where we are putting the fence, right? You know, India has come up with DPDP bill. It shows, you know, how important the data is for us, and you know how robust we are trying to make that data security infrastructure. But I want to understand from you what DPDP law means for companies in terms of privacy and security.
So I think there's like two things people are focused on sometimes, and I think maybe too narrowly. One is there's a 250 crore fine if you do the wrong thing, and the other is, you know, impact of the law on companies having to implement it. I think if we all take a step back and really think about this, to build a digital economy, we have to share information, right? Suppose starting tomorrow, you and I said we will never give our phone number to somebody. We can't live in that world because I can't take a Uber, I can't open a bank account. So the digital economy, by definition, requires exchange of information. Now, what's happened is, because there were no laws around it, it happened in chaotic manner, right? When that chaotic stuff keeps happening, at some point, either we will stop giving that personal information to companies, or bad things will happen more and more. So the DPDP Act really is what I think it should have been called a trust law. It's a law that establishes more trust between the consumers and the businesses by saying, hey, in India now, any business that's doing business with you as a consumer, when you give your Aadhaar ID, when you give your PAN number, when you give your phone number, the government is going to make sure that they use it in the right manner, store it in an encrypted format, only use it where it's necessary, called data minimization, only use it the way you thought it was going to be used, consent management, allow it to be deleted when you want it to be deleted, called DSAR. So all these acronyms combined together are really meant to protect the fact that we need to engage in these exchange of PII in order to do business together.
All right, you know, before this conversation, even I was not really, you know, sure of where my data is going, and I did not care, you know, about my data, but now you have scared me a lot when it comes to data. On that note, Anshu, if you can discuss any technological advancement when it comes to your company, Skyflow, in this segment of data privacy and security, you know, how are you leading your company with more innovations and more technological advancements?
So in some ways, being a young company, we get to invent everything from scratch. So as I said, we didn't have to build fences and then try to move them to cloud. We built it ground up. But there's a couple of new things that have come out. One is we finally got a patent on our polymorphic approach. Again, it's a set of buzzwords, but behind the scenes what's happening is we can actually allow you to search for a customer without seeing the customer's data. So think about all the times when you call up a call center, they need to verify you or search for you. What if that could happen without them seeing your data, right? Sounds magical, but it's possible. Similarly, what if they could analyze information about you without knowing your information? Again, in the real world, we can't do that, but with polymorphic zero knowledge proofs, we can do that. So that's the core innovation that we've been doing last few years. Going forward, one of the things we've recently added is with the Gen AI coming out. So think about all the data we were giving in your example to these companies, because they need to be able to call you, text you, profile you. But now these models are going to have to understand your needs and maybe proactively send you an email saying, hey, based on the fact that I know that you enjoy staying in hotels by the beach, but you hate humidity, here is an offer that we have for the weather being nice in Goa in February. And by the way, if you say yes, we'll book not just the hotel for you, but we'll also call a partner airline, right? That's the magic of Gen AI. Agents will be able to do things on your behalf. But to do that, these models have to be built using information about our lives. And that's a scary proposition because these models don't really have any controls in them. They don't have a way to even delete the data. So what we did was we basically took our polymorphic engine and built a Gen AI firewall so that companies that are interacting with the models or building the models or using the models can do it with anonymization. So the core idea is, can you build and use models without ever seeing somebody's real information? So those are the two things that are looking forward.
All right, thank you for explaining that so beautifully. But let's talk about real examples, like real case studies. So if you can share any success story or any case study where you have helped any company to sort of, help with their data privacy and security, and also help them to kind of not pay the penalties now, right?
Hundreds of customers. I think I'll give you a couple of examples. One of our customers is Hippocratic AI. NVIDIA's CEO Jensen was talking about them just a few weeks ago. What they're doing is very interesting. Basically, they're building a model of a nurse because a lot of activities that nurses have to do are not really related to medical care. It's not like they're diagnosing you. They're calling you and saying, hey, can you show up tomorrow? Make sure that when you come in, you're not wearing any jewelry because the X-ray machine can't have that. Make sure that you drink lots of water, or make sure that you don't drink water for a whole day. All of those things today are done by very expensive people, right? Even in India, but in the US, that can be $100 an hour person. So what they're doing is building a model nurse. To do that, they have to feed that model a lot of health information because that's how the model gets trained. So Hippocratic has been using Skyflow to make sure that the data gets anonymized before it goes into the models so that the models they're building will never have any personal information. Another company that we're working with is GoodRx. They are an online provider of e-commerce in healthcare space. They kind of do a combination of insurance and pharma. They have tens of millions of customers' personal information so that they can provide them the medical care, usually in the form of discounted drugs. And they've been using Skyflow to protect the data that's literally going end to end. So the example that you and I were just talking about, so from the moment somebody subscribes to their information, the data gets pseudo-anonymized, encrypted, tokenized, so that their CRM system, their data lake system, their analytics system, and increasingly now their generative AI system will never have any plain text information. So something bad were to happen, both internal risks and external risks, the data is already pseudo-anonymized, which means because of the tokens have no value, it's protected. So we have many such customers who are using us for data protection in both Gen AI use cases and traditional analytics and search use cases. One last one would be data residency. So the law is in India that allows you to protect the data also requires you to store some of the citizens' data in this country. But that law is also true in Europe, GDPR. So if you're a company like Apaya or some of these other companies we work with, Ziluri, you have to have global multiple instances. So we are able to help companies expand globally and go to multiple different countries very quickly, like in weeks, rather than months and years that it takes.
All right, you're helping companies to expand globally, but what about your global expansion plans? What is in store when it comes to your plans of expanding across regions, especially in the areas where there is high demand for data privacy solutions?
Yeah, so surprisingly, we started the company in selling the product mostly out of the US market, but within the first year and a half, we had customers in Africa, Japan, Australia. So we got pulled or pushed into a global market really fast. Earlier this year, we raised $30 million led by Vinod Khosla at Khosla Ventures. We're using that money to expand globally, especially in countries that are passing stricter laws or just happen to have a lot of sensitive data. So that includes India for sure, Indonesia, China has a law called PIPL. So all of these countries that have had laws passed, or frankly countries like Australia where they've had some very significant breaches, we are seeing people become aware. And it's going from becoming a compliance issue to genuinely a customer trust issue. Because at the end of the day, the younger generation grew up using Instagram and Signal. They know what privacy controls mean, right? So some of the older people may not know the difference between Signal and WhatsApp and Instagram and Snapchat, but a younger person knows what it means to delete a photo or a message after you've sent it. Those same consumers, when they go talk to an airline, they want to know where their data is getting stored and when it will delete it. So as a result, there's pressure being built on. If you remember famously, Mark Zuckerberg 10 years ago declared, there is no privacy, get over it. If you've been reading the newspaper, every day there's a front page ad saying WhatsApp encrypts the data end-to-end and privacy, right? That's the change. The change is the company that was known for the least amount of privacy is trying to now become a privacy-centric company, and they've done a very good job doing that. But that transition has to happen for every company, whether it's a bank or an airline. Otherwise, you'll be left behind, and then you have to run front page ads for a year just to prove to people that you can trust their data.
All right, that was some fascinating examples and brilliant expansion plans on your part. But as we wrap up this conversation, what future trends are you anticipating in this space, and perhaps how are you kind of strategizing your plans in terms of aligning with these future trends?
You know, as I said, some problems are eternal, right? Data storage is an eternal problem. That's why you see company after company. I think PII is one of those problems that's always been there, right? It keeps changing. So we're going to stay focused on managing, securing personal information. But the way that data gets used is changing with generative AI, with traditional machine learning, with analytics. So we are following the use case journey. So as people are using this data more and more in more use cases, we're evolving our product. So whether it's detecting PII in a conversation, because now chatbots are using your information, whether it's workflow agents, if you've heard of agentic AI, where agents are doing things on your behalf. Well, to do things on your behalf, the agent needs your personal information. But that also has the problem of the agent now having your personal information. So all of these new scenarios and use cases you see, oftentimes people talk on TV about them. When it comes to actually deploying them in production, they need to actually have the security and privacy controls in place. And that's where we are following our customers. And think soon enough, you'll be using a chatbot to not just rebook your flight, but also asking the airline agent to talk to the Uber agent, so that when your flight is late by 37 minutes, you don't have to call up your Ola or Uber to come 37 minutes later. It already tells that without sharing your personal information in plain text. And that would be an amazing world.
Of course, that would be an amazing world. And on that note, you know, it's time that we collectively move forward towards data privacy. But before moving forward, we need to educate ourselves on what is data, why the privacy is required, and what happens if it is not secured. Well, thank you for answering those questions for us, Anshu. And to our viewers, stay tuned for more such insightful conversations only at ET Studios in association with ETCIO.